Welcome everybody to the talk this morning, which is a Dezeen by Bentley Lighthouse talk, looking at rethinking luxury materials here in Milan at Atelier Bentley Home. It's a great pleasure to have you all here this morning. My name is Fraser. I'm the new editorial director at Dezeen. I've just recently joined, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here to host today's discussion during Milan Design Week 2023. This is the first in a series of Lighthouse Talks that Dezeen is staging in partnership with Bentley, and it's part of a 3-year partnership that will see Bentley working with Dezeen to support and inspire the next generation of design talents, as well as champion design excellence and sustainable innovations. During today's discussion, we will be asking what the future of luxury holds, with a particular focus on some of the new material innovations that might move the sector beyond the time-honored material palette of noble and perhaps rare materials that are often associated with luxury. And we will hear various interpretations of the word luxury in 2023 and consider innovations in biomaterials and fabrication, as well as the role of circularity in the supply chain. Indeed, who is driving change, and can the high-end sector help to lead the way in terms of a new era of responsible innovation? So I'm joined by a great panel this morning. At the end here, we have Ilse Crawford. She's the designer and founder of Studioilse in London. Next to her is Chris Cooke, head of Bentley Design Collaborations. Next to him, Monique Zappalà is the art creative director at Bentley Home. And next to me is Maurizio Montalti. He's the chairman and co-founder of Skim. So in a moment, I will ask each speaker to briefly introduce themselves beyond what I've just said, and indeed their work. And then we will spend about 40 minutes or so in discussion before opening up to our guests here today in the room. So if you do have any questions, get thinking as we go along. So without further ado, who should we start with? Ilse, tell us about yourself. But I'd also like, at this moment, if you could introduce yourselves, but at the same time, answer my first question, which is, I'm interested in your definition of what luxury means today. And I think we probably all in this room have a preconception of what the word means. And I thought it might be interesting to hear from each of you to set a sort of 2023 benchmark in the definition of the word.
Well,
introduce yourself first.
Okay, I've had a very varied career, starting out as journalist, moving into product development in New York in the fashion world, to starting my own studio and teaching indeed at the Design Academy Eindhoven, which is something that Maurizio and I have in common. Alongside that, my own studio works out in the field. So we essentially make places, I would say, commercially, with clients who want to push the boundaries. We've worked across projects at a smaller scale, like Aesop originally, Edhem in Stockholm, social projects, Refectorium Felix for the food charity Food for Soul, and also for private clients. What's interesting about my background is that I get to see inside people's minds, because I think in order to change the future, first of all, you have to design minds. And to answer the first question, therefore, what is luxury? I think it really is a moving target. I think often when people discuss luxury, so it's a fixed thing. But I mean, that's patently not true. If you look at the historical cycle of luxury, it always starts as a sort of vision of the future. It becomes developed, and then it gets hollowed out. So, we're seeing meter on meter of beige sofa. I think it might be, on its last legs, that one. Now, our clients, at least, and I would say they are ahead of the curve, otherwise they wouldn't be working with us, whether in commercial or in private, are looking certainly at how to be environmentally and also in terms of the wider messaging of what they do sustainable, but they're very wary of, greenwash or indeed hogwash. And at the same time, they also want it usually, but not only, to be rather sophisticated. But there's absolutely no question in my mind that if I look at our clients' age range, I would say from late 30s to 60, it's, as one of them said, taking a deep breath, it must be said, because it was a big commercial project, said, I don't want to be one of the last generation. I want to be one of the first of the next generation.
Great. Thank you, Ilse. Chris.
Okay, thank you. So, hello everybody. I'm Chris Cooke. I'm head of Bentley Design Collaborations. Bentley is a lifestyle brand at its very heart. It's a 100-year-old company with fantastic level of prestige attached to it. And my role as head of Design Collaborations is to really collaborate with amazing people, amazing companies that are breaking new ground in the luxury industry. For me, it's a fantastic job because I get to see a lot of the luxury world and a wide range of different products and different, certainly, materials as well. So for me, luxury really, to define a luxury product, it's obviously a subjective subject. It means different things to different people. So it's always hard to kind of pinpoint exactly what it is. For me, it's something that really exudes quality. I think it needs to be something that is ultimately unique and beautiful. But I think the real key message with what makes a luxury material is human interaction, human investment, I think. Someone that is either investing in time or a skill to create something that is inherently beautiful. I think that's what makes something truly special. And obviously you can look at the narrative that's woven into that and add depth and colour to these materials. But I think ultimately if it's about emotional expression, it's about engaging in people and getting people to fall in love with something that you're creating, something that means something to them. And that for me is what creates a luxury material. I think the luxury industry has changed a lot over the years, certainly since I've been kind of working in it. I think it started off quite extrovert. Luxury was an extrovert statement, almost as wealth and a little bit materialistic at times. But I think it's evolved. I think luxury is becoming way more progressive than that now. I think that it's more about a personal statement for you as an individual and kind of working with brands and purchasing brands that align to your value system. I think that's the future of luxury, and I think that's where luxury is now and today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Monique, over to you.
Okay, so I'm Monique Zappalà, and welcome to the Bentley Atelier. I studied at the Parsons University at New York. I studied fashion, and I started working with fashion, working with materials, fell in love actually with materials and textiles, and then started studying interior design. I worked in luxury living. The first brand that I worked with was Kenzo Maison. So of course the textiles, the materials really came in. And 10 years ago we started with Bentley Home. So a huge challenge, an automotive that's doing a lifestyle. What more challenging than that was? So of course, again, the Bentley Motors, the beautiful materials that they have inside, it was actually interpreting not the car, but what this client wants to live. What can we give? Where can we take them? What can be this journey? So getting out of the car, taking the beauty that was in the car and taking it to a fantastic journey that's home, that's giving him actually the vibe of where a home can be. This was the most difficult part and the most challenging part at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So luxury, of course, for me is authenticity. So that's the first thing. It has to be real. Luxury has to be real. It's behind people, it's behind materials, it's behind something very different. But to make it different, it has to be real.
Thank you, Monique.
You're welcome.
Maurizio, over to you.
Here we go. It's fantastic to be here today in great company, and thanks for having me. Well, talking about myself, in a nutshell, I always have difficulty to define myself with a single word because I have a rather hybrid background. But, well, let's start from what I'm running in the Netherlands. I'm a designer by training, and I run a design studio. It's a design research-driven studio in the Netherlands that experiments at the border between disciplines, and particularly the disciplines of design and microbiology, biotechnology, that brought me in time to work in close cooperation with other than human systems, in fact, microorganisms, and specifically fungal organisms, to enact novel processes of production. So let's say establish the possibility of shifting the paradigm of production from the one that is usually rooted in extractive, exploitative type of approaches towards fully regenerative processes. This is rooted in an active cooperation with the plurality of life that exists among us. And in fact, working with nature as part of nature, for nature, which is a fundamental point, of course, to reflect upon, considering that we still nowadays too often tend to establish quite a nonsensical divide between the notions of nature and culture, as if culture would be something outside of nature. And we do not recognize the dynamic meaning of what nature is in its continuous becoming and transformation, with culture being one force shaping it. So what I actually try to do as part of the studio's projects, which are more experimental, explorative projects, is to reconciliate our relationship with all the rest of the life through a bit of a renewed vision of our material culture. Therefore, partnering with organisms, microorganisms, to create materials that have a fantastic background story in terms of narrative and in terms of sustainability and positive impact when it comes to the ecological resonance that they bring about. But first and foremost, materials that perform and that offer technical qualities as well as experience in order to really be uptaken by the market and start driving a change. And this is something that eventually I started doing back in 2015 with my venture, my company. It's a company based here in Italy that is busy with scaling up and standardizing biological-based processes, biofabrication-based processes for the creation of novel materials and products. So when it comes to luxury, I could expand for a long time about it, but going beyond the traditional ways to conceive the term and the definition, very much related often to exclusivity and so on, for me, luxury in 2023 and hopefully farther, it's about the encounter. It's about the spirit of cooperation. It's about establishing new symbiotic relationships, also at industrial level, with other entities in order to really trigger a positive change. And this is something that emerges from, let's say, the fact of embracing the importance of time and experience when encountering a material or a product in its soul, and particularly shifting to a model where within the industry we are able to valorize notions of honesty, transparency, as key drivers, stopping actually riding the wave of sensationalism in a way that still the design world very much does, and actually responding with very concrete, substantiated actions in order to gather the ultimate trust from the dirty word consumer, or let's say the user. Because that's in fact finally what we need to materialize a renewed vision of how we could effectively cooperate in the most truthful manner within a material culture that resonates with the functioning, the metabolic functioning of the system we are part of and immersed in.
Thank you so much. Of course, we're talking today within the context of materials. We have some fabulous samples in front of us, which we'll get to in a moment. I just wanted to add another definition, if I may. In 2009, when we had just after the financial crisis, or maybe perhaps we were still very much in it, I was involved in a little TV studio that we set up here in Milan, and we had a stream of designers coming through for very short 15-minute kind of soundbite interviews. And one of the questions that I asked all of them was, what is your definition of luxury? And of course, it was a time when we were pushing back a lot around the world of luxury, and there was a sort of tightening of everyone's belts in this kind of austerity moment. And something that was a recurring answer then was their definition of luxury was just time and space. And there was no reference to products or materials at all, actually, quite often in their definition. Little did we know that 11 years later, we would have been afforded so much time and space when the pandemic hit. But I just wanted to throw that one into the mix. Luxury is having time and space, maybe perhaps mental space. Let's talk about some of the materials that still dominate, I would say, the high-end luxury market. Monique, how do you protect or prevent the integrity of the luxury market from being eroded in that regard?
First case, it's research. I would say research behind this and the idea of the craftsmanship. Of course, we're in Italy, so craftsmanship is something very important to this country. We do use this beautiful craftsmanship combined with an artistic way of using veneers, what we're used to. We do special customizations. We have people that do it in an artistic way. So of course, we're working with artisans that are very antique ways of working, but giving this really new vibe of how we can make this material different, look different, and say something different. Behind this year, we worked with a beautiful material with Riccardo Cavacciocchi that's here, that we all have this sample in our hand as well, which is paper factor. Behind this, there's hands. More than anything. Yes. So behind paper, there's hands. There's someone that's molding this, that's someone that's having a story. And the beauty that I really fell in love with this material is who's making it, who's actually working with this material. It fascinated me so much to see the way that they are making it. And behind this with Riccardo, when I went to go see this beautiful artistic laboratory, and I saw these people actually putting and molding, and it was like they were making dough. It was something amazing. But behind that, there's a story of every person, and just to think that their hands are making this story is incredible. So today we have a piece, but it's a beautiful piece, and it does look like a stone, but it's not a stone, and you touch it and it's soft, but behind that there's hands.
Yes.
And that's what really fascinates me, is to see who's behind a story.
Yes.
I think that's the most beautiful way of researching materials.
And while you're on the subject of this material, I hope everybody has a sample that they are enjoying the tactility of it. But could you just explain how it is made?
Well, we have someone right in front of me, because that's him who actually makes it. And because I love putting highlights on the hands and behind the people, I would just say that I fell in love with this material, that it is celluloise, that it is something that his family, actually his mother, was restoring and using this very antique, where it starts in the south of Italy. She had this laboratory, which is a beautiful technique from the past, an ancient technique. And Riccardo has a very artistic and modern way of interpreting it. So I'm not the right one to say how it's made, but how probably I found it.
Right.
So it's a very particular way of mixing. I think there's a few secrets, even if the material is very simple. No? Yeah. The material is very simple.
Should we segue to a quick explanation?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's called paper marble.
Yeah,
right. So
basically, Paper Factory is born as a platform to create materials and process material from cellulose derivatives. So we start as a small brand. Now, step by step, we are involved in more process and more, let's say, materials coming, or cellulose fibers, let's say, coming from post-consumer, post-industrial, which is construction, food. So there is always an alchemy between, wood and food, and we create always new, let's say, formulas with new ingredients. The process is quite simple on the way how we finalize it, because we don't have emissions. It's all, the majority is a cold process, which we are trying always to push more, because of course we are developing all things. It will start as a test experiment, So the project was born mainly like in New York, and then at the end I decided to come back to Italy and to place because of the manufacturing and the level. In fact, it was a big and important help. I've always been like obsessed in some way with the functions, the multifunctions in material. That's why I arrived to this point coming from architecture. In particular, this is all hand model, hand press. And this is more than a stern is a passion for skins. That's why in the collection we call skins the surfaces, because this comes from like a kind of elephant skins. We take inspiration from nature, and which is one of the most beautiful things. And this is it.
I'm guessing you maybe don't want to give the ingredients away. That's what I'm getting at.
No, not at all.
But my interest always with these kind of
even extremely technical, so probably it's not even interesting. But we do use cellulose, or from like a sustainable production chain. Sometimes depends by the color. Like in this case, I recycle. It can come sometimes from jeans, chocolate, wine. Depends, what we have to achieve in terms of color and the work and the project. Of course, clear colors, they need always to come from like a more virgin assets. And then we use like glues, and everything is water-based, pH neutral. So,
right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's been a lot of reference to the hand, of course, but I was wondering maybe if we consider some of the newer digital technologies, fabrication technologies that are now available. How is that moving the story on, Chris?
I think technology as a whole, especially from my experience, I am a automotive designer. I trained as an automotive designer, worked at Bentley for a long time. So I'm absolutely obsessed with surfaces and surface quality. I drive Monique crazy when we're designing pieces for the actual, the finite, minute details of the form of a piece. I think that always comes in a balance, though. I think that you need to have a balance between things that are very precise and also things that are very beautiful. I think it's also nice when you also see little kind of imperfections in final surfaces because they've been made by hand and by love. But I think future technologies and in terms of digitalization, one thing is that we can be more precise with the surfaces we're creating. That helps us in terms of, that saves us a bit more time in terms of developing surfaces moving forward. Luxury design is an iterative process. Things aren't right first time, and I think it takes time to go over and over and make sure that a product is at its very best that it can be. And so in terms of fabrication, we were seeing a rise certainly over the last few years of new technologies coming forward that are linked to digital. So for things like 3D printing, for example, 3D printing isn't really a luxury manufacturing process. People 3D print in their bedrooms now. But what's really interesting about the shift to that kind of dynamic is that it changes the onus from the craft being involved in the manufacturing process, which is more traditional, to the craft being involved in the digital process. Because that level of craft, that level of digital creation is still a form of craft. To create these kind of crazy and really exciting structures that you can with 3D printing, you have to end up, we've done it a few times, but we've had to write algorithms to actually create these surfaces. And that, again, it's not easy. It's a form of craftsmanship. So I think that's a very exciting kind of avenue to move down, and I think that's something that the luxury industry will continue to investigate in. But at the same time, I do generally think there's still a drive and a desire for those kind of more traditional notions of luxury and of craftsmanship. I don't think they'll go away. I think we can innovate and we can change those things and we can change the narrative. But I still think there'll be a firm place for just beautifully simple, well done, well executed materials.
And certainly the marriage of those two things within the Bentley factory is a beautiful thing to witness, right? You're
absolutely, yeah.
Cutting edge technologies right next to incredible hand skill, all in the same environment, and the merging of the two.
We call it, we notion it the harmony of polarities, because we as a brand, we play with the two extremes a lot. Yeah. We're something that's very contemporary, but also very traditional. We have a lot of technology, but also a lot of hand craftsmanship. And that really comes through in the products we create as well, outside of the automotive world.
Yeah. This is a question for Ilse and Maurizio. Maybe we start with you, Ilse. you're working with lots of different manufacturers and brands in what you do. How do you feel like some of those brands are responding to the population's kind of increasing awareness and indeed concern of their ecological footprint?
I think some undoubtedly are, and actually often I think people are surprised by which ones they are. You know, there's a lot of talk, and it's very interesting to see where the action is happening. But it is a really tough call because, you know, the world that we live in is like a sort of ocean liner, and it's not going to just spin around overnight. It's a whole system we're talking about. And so in a lot of our projects, we work with smaller suppliers where we have visible supply chains. And that's, I think, where things get really fascinating, because it's a constant reminder of how we've, you know, basically the commodification of everything for the last few hundred years when we talk about noble materials. But every material is noble. All materials can be beautiful if they are looked at differently, if they are touched by the hand, if the skill is there. You know, it's what we do with them that makes the difference. And, you know, I completely agree with Maurizio in terms of our relationship with nature. But to be perfectly honest, we've messed that up, you know, big time with lots of other plants. You know, we were talking about some of the samples that are just in front. And I think the number of layers of commercial exploitation, cultural exploitation, I mean, you know, one could go on, that make us not even see the possibilities of plants is extraordinary. I mean, you know, we were looking at some materials here ourselves just before and not able to really tell what they are. You know, I can talk to a couple of these soon, but very often the fact that historically something's been used in, let's call it a poor capacity effect, makes us not understand that it is a sustainable thing, especially if you take out all the layers of profit in between.
And I should add that Ilse put me through the test this morning with some of these materials, and they are amazingly difficult to identify, weirdly, along the lines of what you're saying.
But indeed, actually, to connect to the latter that you were talking about, so the need, let's say, for education also in the audience about what is what, in particular about the origin of things. This is a fundamental requirement for progressing further, and not just within the consumer world, but particularly within the relationships with brands. From my humble position, I can say that along the past few years, I had the privilege to cooperate, and still I'm doing, with the luxury industry, particularly the luxury fashion industry, but also the automotive market at large, including luxury companies. And there is truly a drive towards change being very prominent at this moment, in some cases out of will, in most of the cases out of need. And way too often there are, let's say, there is a lack of understanding of what simple notions encompass. Particularly, I mean, we can go back to the very ever used and strongly misused term bio, the suffix bio, which tends to confuse every single body, because nowadays nobody knows anymore what does it mean that something is biological, bio-based, biodegradable, and or, you know, there are a lot of definitions that tend to create a lot of confusion. And this is also the case within the brands. So in my experience, it's been key actually to go through, let's say, an early stage process of getting to know each other by working without pretending to be particularly presumptuous, but as an educator within that system, and trying to explain also what triggering a certain type of innovative outputs has as implications, including the fundamental need for a relatively, well, medium, if not long-term timeline to look at when it comes to the full innovation journey that can bring to effectively deliver innovations that can make a difference. And this is something that we are experiencing as a consistent acceleration within the particular field I'm operating within. Because in fact biotechnology is progressing very, very quickly, but there is a little bit of a strange expectation about the fact that things could change from day to night, and that is not the case. And this expectation is very much often also going in line with the fact that we tend not to be capable of looking beyond, to be visionary beyond what we know. There is a tendency in the market, whatever market we are talking about, the fashion market, the interior market, or the automotive one, of just basing every kind of consideration on a benchmarking with what is the status quo, because that is what we know. And therefore, also when we talk about innovation and we bring about in a concrete manner innovative products, they tend to be compared and considered as replacements.
Completely.
In the best cases as alternatives, but never as entirely new class of materials and products on their own that express an entirely different potential from the point of view of the origin, the manufacturing or biofacturing, if we want to call it like that, and the end of life when it comes to the whole life cycle of a product, of a material and of a product, and therefore the implications that that type of matter has on our existence, because it impacts the functioning of the ecosystem. And so we still have to mature a little bit more probably in order to really activate an effective change and positive impact.
So I feel like there's a itching desire to get into some of these samples. And I'd love you to talk about what the work that you're doing with, if we talk about the origin of things,
right.
You are dealing with really the origin of things, the origin of life, which is of course mycelium, where we all and everything comes from. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Some of the materials that you're working on within your company, and perhaps hold some of them up.
Absolutely.
To show us, and maybe we can even pass them around.
That's for sure. Let's start from the point of view of where do things originate from? The soil. The soil. We depend on the soil. We depend on the health of the soil, of the ecosystem. And within the soil, there is a multiplicity of organisms or living systems that cooperate or compete, no matter how we look at it, in order to establish this complex dynamic. And one among those many organisms are fungi, a kingdom on their own. They are not plants, and they are fantastic organisms. They're very tiny, very minuscule, but in fact, ever present. Right now, you're breathing an enormous amount of fungal spores, not because I'm here. And wherever you step, in fact, you just step on mycelium, step on an intelligent network that in nature is responsible for digesting all different types of organic matters and transforming them in nutrients for other forms of life to flourish. And what we do is, in fact, at a company level, and it all started at a studio level, is to promote processes of mycelial growth by feeding these organisms with residual materials from other value chains. So what people often call waste, we're talking here about lignocellulosic material, so any kind of plant, vegetal matter that contains cellulose and that can function as a food source for your organism, of course in a good blend, and then you have to establish particular conditions. But once you have made your fungus comfortable, you allow it to basically ferment these materials, to feed on them, and to transform them into something else, which is in fact fungal biomass. So what you're looking at here is essentially 100% mycelium of a specific species and strain that has formed a mat. It's a little bit of a dense mat, and we can pass it around if you like, by being guided through a process where many parameters play a role. We are talking about, again, the nutrition, the terrain. It smells a little bit like porcini when you open it.
Yeah, it does. His breakfast, people.
And this is a raw material. So what we do is actually, again, guiding the growth of the fungus, allowing it to structure a material that is 100% natural, 100% biodegradable, and yet extremely consistent, because when we work for developing this type of technology, we do it always with in mind the industrial scale. We need to look at the feedstock availability, we need to look at the industrial scalability from all points of view, and in this case we have been able, through our proprietary technology to achieve products that are fully homogeneous and fully reactive. Homogeneous from the point of view of density and color, but reactive also along processes of transformation in downstream, which is the analogy to what happens in the case of animal leather when it comes to tanning. So that's essentially what we do. We form these materials through, again, different custom-made fermenters, and eventually we subject them to treatments rooted in green chemistry, where we stabilize and eventually, whether needed, enrich the materials in order to become, now here you have some different examples, to become something like this, which are materials that can be fully usable. And in this case, this is a specific material that I particularly privilege, despite it's not a very thick material, this one. It's very supple, it's relatively warm, and at the same time, it expresses, let's say, it's true language. I like actually, I saw it from a distance earlier, yeah. But the product we were talking about before, because in fact, if we look at this material and this kind of elephant-like skin, it's very, very speaking about the language that brought the material to come to being in the first place, which is the process through which mycelium creates this dense network of microfilaments that form such substrate. And so it gives the opportunity, besides being a functional material that can be used along traditional manufacturing steps, of course, also to introduce innovation from the point of view of aesthetics and allow to stop talking about mere replacements, which is what happens constantly in the industry, which clearly very often tends to ask for something that is well known, say the imitation grain, because everything needs to be recognizable in order to be accepted by the consumer in this transition that we are currently going through. I don't know if you like actually to pass some of those around. And maybe
I think we all know which material we're referring to here when we look at something like this.
Right. I mean, what I particularly like is also the back, if you look at it.
Yeah.
Because here, this is not a honest language. This is a hyper-perfected surface that is what certain industries might be asking for. But in fact, if you ask me, particularly from a design perspective, this is where value resides.
Yes.
The value of imperfection, the value of uniqueness of every single piece being consistent in terms of technical and experiential properties, but unique in terms of also the look, for instance.
The value of imperfection. I love that. And I think that leads really nicely on to Ilse, because that's something that I feel you celebrate a lot in the work that you do.
And it's very interesting to hear you talk about, what's obviously a very upscale product. And I'm going to go to something that's quite another thing, wool. And I think what none of us probably know, because we are, I think, collectively pretty clueless about materials and how they arrive in our world, is much about wool. I mean, it's a huge quantity of wool out there. It's a vast commodity. Most of it comes, for our world of interiors, comes from New Zealand. And then it goes to various places in the world. In order to get natural wool, it's usually bleached and then dyed a natural colour, so that you get the standardised product that everybody, the market, demands, which is clearly bonkers. So when we did a project with Nanni Marchina, that's a very reputable, very passionate company based in Barcelona, decades old, we said, okay, let's ask the producers what they would love to work with, the producers of these carpets. And it was really interesting. It boiled down very simply to no bleach, no dye, locally sourced and hand spun. So essentially taking all the nasties out of the system, which is one of the reasons that, we vilified these things. But also taking also the money back to them, in the house. The spinning is done within their communities. The wool is sourced as locally as possible. It stops it travelling around the world and going back and forth, being dyed and bleached and probably bleached again. The downside of this, if you want to say there's a downside, is it's not perfect, to your point. So one of the challenges was to design people's minds, essentially, and it took a little while. It wasn't an instant thing. For people to recognize that while they would choose a sample in New York, let's say, the carpet when it arrived might be slightly different, because guess what? The sheep was different. The place they lived was different. The time of the year was different. I mean, within a bandwidth, you know, it wasn't crazy different, but we're so used to this idea that we get what we want. You know, we choose something and we match it, and we can't let go of this idea of control, actually. And a whole financial system is based on that. That's actually, in my opinion, really bad for the end result and really bad for the makers.
Also have to have a sniff. It smells wonderful. How do you respond to that notion of perfection and consistency, both of you? Because of course that's too much.
Wow.
To a large extent, your world. You know?
That's the big challenge of where we are in the luxury field. Is
two sides of the leather.
It's two sides of the leather.
Yeah.
I remember some vases that were actually, we still have them, that were made in Murano, and of course they're blown by mouth, and some clients said, but they're not perfect, and there's bubbles, and it was really difficult to say, do you really know how this is made? Because how can this be the same? And where is that something is perfect? Who really says this is perfection? You know, why does something have to be so perfect? But it is the huge challenge, and I really feel it, because this is where I am. I'm in the luxury field, and this is where we have to really help our clients, and especially, you know, new generations and different areas of the world, to think, you know, that this is the beauty, is to see that it can't be perfect. And this is the real beauty about it.
I mean, it's probably not just your clients, but it's probably internal
Yes,
as well,
yes,
right?
yes, definitely.
There's like a
It's
need
measurable,
for a bit
no?
of,
Yeah.
Perfection.
absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's scary. Yeah.
There's a need for some re-education, I think, in the world today, because it happens, you know, to us as well, where, you know, a client will see maybe a piece of stitching, and you'll see a slight wobble in one of the stitches, and they say that's not perfect. But, you know, for maybe some other products that they have, which are mass manufactured on a machine, they are perfect. They're pinned straight. And you have to say that, you know, the reason that's not perfect is because someone's made that. Someone who has taken years to learn their craft has put their heart and soul into that, and they've made that little wobble, and that imperfection is how you can tell. So it's bringing them on that journey to understand the beauty in the imperfection of real, authentic materials and how they're put together. It's something that we try to do. But
It's very interesting though, because definitely generationally, I can think of clients who, I mean, and they fit that description completely. But what I am noticing is happening, and interestingly, it's slightly, you know, it's younger, but it's people in tech. They're reacting against that completely. People who've made their money in technology want the physical, the warmth. You know, they're sending their children to Waldorf schools. You know, they read books. They never read novels on screen. You know, their boundaries, I think, are very different. And obviously, one has to be careful of generalization. Different parts of the world, slightly different, but it's not one or two. It's definitely a movement. Yeah.
I mean, there's storytelling is a huge part of this as well. You know, if you put imperfect products in front of somebody with no story, you may struggle. So how as a brand do you communicate the notion of how do you communicate all these important stories behind some of these innovations? Who wants to answer that one?
I mean, maybe I can take it off. Go for it. Well, the narrative is, of course, very important in order to, it's not educate sounds a little bit presumptuous, but inform your counterparty or your interlocutor.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the narrative can be also very dangerous, and that's the world we live in. Of course, when it comes to substantiate a certain type of appreciation for something that maybe somebody cannot recognize because maybe lacking the sensitivity for a craft-based skill or for the uniqueness of a certain manufacturing process based on craft and so on. That's one thing. But when it comes to promoting products or wannabe products, there is such a confusion out there. It's like everybody, these days more than ever, considering, of course, the digital culture and the media world at large, rise the wave of sensational announcements that way too often do not correspond to the actual thing that is existing at the time. And so also when it comes to materials, no matter if they are more traditional materials, so to say, rather than more up-and-coming and innovative solutions, there is a lot of confusion in regard to what is real, what is tangible, what is concretely and feasibly possible to implement in a project, and what it is in fact really, and what is not. In fact, we see a lot of different manifestations of what I'm telling when it comes to people building up fantastic campaigns in terms of marketing and communication, but not being capable eventually to deliver what they promise, or faking information or hiding information behind the purity or the virtuous impact that a certain material or product may bring about. And this is, I think, and I connect to my definition of luxury earlier on, I think is something that we in design are fundamentally responsible for. We need to really change this idea of positioning ourselves for the sake of the individual, while I know it sounds very idealistic and perhaps a little naive, but while really trying to foster a change which is rooted in something concrete, in something tangible, and that can be appreciated for what it is and maybe also for what it is already not, and that will come. But again, this notion of transparency, this notion of honesty should be reflected in the nature of what a product truly embeds, and also in regard, of course, to every single little detail that characterizes the uniqueness of that specific article due to the impact that the skill, like craft-based skill, can have
It has to
along
be
the
true,
manufacturing.
as you said earlier, you know, and if you tell the truth, no one can find you out. So, but I think that's an issue right now.
And then what about sort of skepticism around longevity and durability? Because that's, of course, issues if you're applying, depending where you're applying the material within which market. I mean, certainly within the car market, I would imagine you're having to deal with enormous levels of testing, health and safety, you name it, around a new material before it's introduced to a car, which of course you may be able to implement a little bit sooner within the home collection, perhaps. It's a different application. Do you want to talk about that in relation to the car market specifically?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the automotive industry is just famous for the stringent level of testing that goes into any material that's selected. I mean, there's just it takes years to get a material from, okay, that looks interesting, could we use that, down to it's in a production line and it's being moved into a customer's home. And we lose a lot of materials that way, and we lose a lot of the creativity that way. And it's hard for designers when they're putting their heart and soul into these pieces and they think it's going to be incredible. It hasn't passed the UV test. And, you know, I've fallen foul to that in my career many times. And so, what's really nice about the fact that we are a lifestyle brand and the fact that we have the ability to work outside of automotive so well and so creatively is that we can start investigating these, you know, amazing things and these amazing materials and steadily bring them back into the car. Perhaps we can lead the automotive industry on some of the things that we're creating, and you know, these materials, these are inherently Bentley materials. They function in the way that we want them to. So we know that for sure.
But I really think that it's an approach that we can do with the Bentley world. So it's okay, it's not going in a car, but Bentley is this material that we're actually studying, that we're looking for in our field. So it is Bentley. When we see a piece, when we design a piece together, when we choose the materials, it always has to aim at the end that it has to be Bentley. So even if we are looking in new materials that can't go inside of a car, it's a little bit like our collection. It's not living inside of a car, it's out of the car. So that's when it's named Bentley. So it's our product. It doesn't have to be in the car.
Yeah, and probably to connect to that, if I may, I mean, being Bentley probably means being quality.
Yes.
Being able to deliver 100% quality, uncompromised quality. And this is, in fact, a little bit of the ultimate question, because particularly when it comes to materials and their need to perform, coming back to your question about potential skepticism also in regard to durability of something that is meant to be natural, and therefore it's understood as something that might pass very quickly, might not pass the UV test, rather than even the most banal mechanical test, tensile strength or whatever kind of fire resistance or whatever other stringent tests that exist in automotive. The point is, what is the trade-off that you are able to go through? What kind of compromise, that always sounds like a dirty word, are you able to embrace without completely jeopardizing the origin of your initiative? And I make the example, still talking about our material culture, when it comes to materials that are considered natural, even animal leather, animal-derived leather, people think it's natural material, it's right? There's nothing natural to it. That has nothing to do with an animal skin, mostly often, particularly because the material is subjected to a lot of different treatments along tanning, and depending on which type of tanning, there might be very dangerous compounds involved, and eventually even the leather that people recognize as a natural material is coated mostly often with polyurethane. And this is often also the case, inevitably, in any industry. The automotive industry also has a need for perfected surfaces, of course. We see it very well here in Italy, where we have 3 districts in the case of leather working, one being in Veneto, which takes care about the automotive hides. It's big hides, and they need to have an exceptional quality, as opposed to the Tuscany one or the Campania one, which are completely different. But coming back to my point, it's okay, am I able to guarantee quality? And what stands for quality? Durability is one of that factors. Durability is a key element. So if I want to ensure that 100% natural material, the raw material you saw before, that white, fluffy, spongy thingy, can withstand the action of time and so on, I need to embrace today, at this technological moment where in fact not everything has yet been exploded, a little compromise that allows me to maybe sacrifice a couple of percentage points of the naturality of that product in order to ensure that long-lasting capabilities embedded within the product. And this is, again, there's no right or wrong. It's about evaluating what is the main driver and taking responsibility for the implications that introducing perhaps non-degradable compounds that, though ensure durability, has. What are the implications in terms of end of life? How can you take responsibility in taking back that material and knowing how to deal with it once it gets discarded? So it's yet again about conceiving everything along our production processes within again, our industries as something beyond circular, I would say even beyond regenerative, but in fact essentially metabolic, something that needs to fully transform along different cycles in order to flow back as nutrients in the system and allow for regeneration to happen.
I mean, you used the word discarded.
Yeah.
I mean, Ilse, I think of you as somebody who vehemently against the notion of anything being discarded at all, and in fact, things getting better and better and better with age.
Yes, and I think one of our jobs is making our clients comfortable with the idea that things do age, and we put a lot of time into what we call the maintenance manual, which is this very big Bible of looking after things, because it's such old knowledge that you actually need to look after things. And I think part of the durability question is also that people don't look after things like they used to. I mean, people, used to lovingly care for their cars, and that's maybe not so common these days. And it can change, I think. I mean, obviously, you can't switch the clock right back to things that are completely imperfect in your world. But if I think of some experience we had, for example, of doing furniture with a big brand, they were very nervous at a corporate level of taking away the plastic coating because of the international regs, everything you can imagine. But in the end, they realized that it was counterproductive because they really wanted to express this use of a natural material, in this case cork. And they spent a year developing a wax that met all the international regs, that protected it, and so on. So I think it's also the will to find alternatives to the notion that it's a one-stop shop of longevity, you know, that we have to find other ways that allow for things to last, but potentially that do also require some degree of maintenance.
And I think the will is also very much coupled by ingenuity, savoir-faire, il saper fare in Italian, which is, you know, you can have the ultimate ambition and perhaps also have plenty of financial resources to hire the best team to perform a certain task and obtain a certain outcome in terms of, again, a wax, a coating system or so on. But there's no guarantee of success if you're lacking that special ingredient. And that's something that, in fact, we witness actually quite on a daily basis, particularly here in Europe, and in our case specifically in Italy, when confronting ourselves to our counterparts, for instance, in the States, where the ecosystem is very different, the culture of business is very different, the capital available is very different. And yet, even within the most extreme limitations, we realize that it is possible actually to achieve something that could make the difference without necessarily being in the same privileged or comfortable positions that others.
I mean, it is interesting working with the hotel because that is, I would say, the school of hard knocks. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely fascinating. We've definitely made some terrible mistakes and learned from those. But we've also had some amazing wins. And one of them is that when you have a team that are empowered, that do have the knowledge, people perceive the quality of the space because their perception of something that is looked after is that it's more valuable. So there's an interesting non-verbal narrative that happens there. Seeing the team going around, you know, taking care of things really changes the perceived value of the place, as opposed to just spraying that smelly stuff.
I'm conscious of time, and I'm sure all of your brains have been whirring throughout this conversation, and I hope some of you might have some questions you'd like to ask. Please do put up your hand. I should add that we do have a microphone. Please use the microphone. Yes?
Test? Okay.
There you go. Far away.
Just sort of going back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, how do we in reality brand imperfection when every aspect of our lives, our psyche, our very DNA, whether it's fashion or food, or whether it's cosmetic surgery, whether it's diamonds, whether it's even our religions where we're sought to teach, you know, to seek spiritual perfection, except if you're Catholics, you're forgiven for flaws. But the very essence of criticism is flaw. So if everybody's looking and striving for perfect, how do you brand imperfection?
Thank you, sir. That's a great question. Who'd like to answer that?
Well, it's like having the courage. Definitely is having the courage. For us in Bentley Home, we are putting our foot into this with respect. First of all, with respect, because there are people that do it much more with more knowledge and much more inside of themselves feeling that. We do it with respect, and especially a brand like Bentley and a Bentley Home where some finishes, some materials, we all know that we could do better for the planet, but we started doing it. So starting doing it with Bentley and with Bentley Home means that we're taking a step ahead. Doesn't mean that we're doing the right thing because we're doing something that's different or it's not perfection. It means that we have a beautiful brand, and if a beautiful brand is doing something different, that means that different or not perfectly made, it could be something that's perfect. So I think brands do have a lot of responsibility today, and we're starting to do it. This is the beginning, and definitely it's only the beginning of just saying that brands can make a difference.
I think part of that as well is, to kind of answer your question, is the presentation of it. I think if you can present it in an intentional way to show the beauty of it, because a lot of the natural materials, they do have flaws, but we always see that as part of the beauty of the material. And I think if you intentionally present it in a beautiful way and show people how beautiful these flaws are,
yes,
then you kind of shift that kind of expectation in their minds.
Loud enough, can I just jump over that? So would you be saying making that flaw unique to you? The USP would be that, yes, there's a flaw, but you own that flaw.
Absolutely.
It's unique. And that's the back. Now you're back to luxury because it is unique.
Yeah, and every piece is unique. I mean, we go back to Ricardo. What you're creating with the paper marble. This is all done by hand by a craftsman, and every single panel is completely unique to you. You own the only one that looks exactly like that, and that's so special.
That is special.
That's something that you take with you, in a story you take with you forever.
Thank you. Another question from anyone? Thank you, Fanny. Please.
Thank you. So, yes, the mindset has to change, at least the general mindset, because we all know people who are thinking differently. To change in terms of how people consume, also how you sell things, because if you have a unique sample, you may sell quantities of them on that sample and they will all come out differently. And then I think one focus which is for me very interesting is how do we also change production modes, and production modes that take into account the end of life of the product. Ricardo was mentioning glues that were water-based, and I think that's where brands like yours have a role to play in showing that when you do small quantities, you can create new production processes that are viable, that the industry, like the automotive industry, can then get inspiration from and get comfort in, that it is feasible, because it's only with the larger industries that we're going to be changing the way we live. So people like you, Maurizio, are really leading the way in showing how we can do things differently. And I'm talking from an industrial viewpoint where we need shakers and movers for this type of things. So how do you see it happening around you, this change in production processes that will have to be different in the future?
Well, it's very articulated now. Coming to the uniqueness, which you also mentioned at the beginning and connects to the previous question, I think it's very important to realize that when you deal with innovative production processes rooted in natural dynamics and the functioning of and skills of natural organisms, you can never be as deterministic as you are, for instance, with disciplines such as chemistry. Make a banal example, very, very base, but take whatever reagent A, reagent B, let them cure for whatever 20 minutes, and then if you performed that type of process under the same conditions and so on, you'll always achieve that same exact output. That is not the case with biology. Biology has its own agency. And that is why I strive to keep talking about an active cooperation among living systems, humans and non-humans alike. This is a first step, but that's in fact where that step that materializes maybe at a very small scale eventually need to be reflected in an industrial scale. And for going through industrialization also requires going through different steps. From lab you move to a pilot, from a pilot to a demo, from a demo to a commercial, and so on and so forth. And in every step, you try and optimize the flow. So the pilot could be considered a little bit of an artisanal production process where in fact, everything is still very much sub-optimized. You're not able also to supply the industry with the needed volume. So it's still a vision, yet concrete, but very limited in its scopes. And eventually it gets more and more virtuous along the way, not only by means of increasing the volumes or other qualities, but really in conceiving how the production process and how the resources are optimized, both in terms of input, say the nutrition. The nutrition is not a virgin material. The nutrition is a byproduct. It's a residue. It's a waste, if people call it such, even if the notion of waste should finally be surpassed. And eventually it's about creating again, technologies that could reduce to the max any kind of energy input required. So really working with very, very limited consumption of any kind, even if, and that's very much what is happening constantly with the narrative out there, people keep talking most of the times about materials which are zero impact or that are even carbon negative, and they can exist, but mostly often every process embeds energy. There is energy everywhere, and that is why no matter also when you obtain a material that could be truly responsible, also when discarded, there is no justification for you to keep perpetrating, in this case as a user, that limited approach that has to do with getting rid of things just to move on and getting more. Again, it's like natural doesn't mean, it's not a justification for keeping perpetrating a cultural approach that brought us to the stage where we are today. But I think I've been going around your question. Did I answer a part of your question?
But I would also say we also have to keep our minds super open about materials that already exist that we have not included in our pantheon of desirable materials. So we were looking, for example, just before at linoleum. Mm-hmm. Very clean material, around since 1880, industrially produced, biodegradable, all of those things. But would it ever be used in this context? Probably not, because its association is with institutions. But in fact, I was sharing a sample earlier, and they've done a fantastic colour project with Stefan Scholten. Absolutely beautiful. Nobody here could identify it as linoleum. They thought it was something new and special. And so we have to keep an open mind at all times. And then another point is, of course, it is a moving target out there, to your point around energy. So now there are projects around steel, which was formerly bad, but there's a green steel project up in the north of Sweden, which is clean because there's pure clean energy up there, with the wind farms and so on up there, which is allegedly a step towards the future. Aluminium is also improving in front of our eyes. And in fact, we talked to Vasberg Lights yesterday, and they have moved the material from one of their lights from bioplastic to aluminium because it's cleaner. It's more environmentally sound, it's lighter, it's stronger. And, they discovered issues with bioplastic in terms of recycling. It might be bio, but it's hard to deal with it at the end. And also, there's always a danger that it contaminates the plastic recycling process. So we have to keep always reevaluating what's going on, basically. Not just in terms of the new, but also in terms of well-established materials that are changing their game and upping their game.
And I think luxury brands have a responsibility to really tell that story, to be taking these materials, to be working with companies and that are moving the message along, because we have the platform to spread the word and to inspire people and to enact change. And I think that's a really important thing too.
I think it's your responsibility, actually.
It is. It is.
It's an opportunity and a responsibility at a point of immense change to really have, work for a better outcome. No?
Absolutely.
And I think finally, and I mentioned it earlier, it is a shared responsibility. And that's where I think designers play a pivotal role. As catalyzers of change, as actors that are capable of attracting a certain level of attention and without banalizing and oversimplifying information, are able to show exactly how to do things better. Perhaps not.
Recognize a new reality and then we share it.
Yeah.
That's our responsibility. I agree. And we've also left out that word government. I do think a big one, the elephant in the room is regulation.
Yes.
It can't also be down to us as individuals and companies. It also needs to be within a framework where regulation is leading the way.
Well, we need another hour to talk about that one.
Yeah, but we also can't not mention it. I mean,
yes,
we can't do it on our own.
Absolutely. So we are actually out of time. I think this conversation could go on all day, and I wish it could. It's been really fantastic to talk to the four of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for coming. I would say that we have some time maybe afterwards to continue discussing in the other room. But please put your hands together for a wonderful panel.
Thank you.